Hey everybody, it's the married man here. We're here today and made some countdown calendars to give away as gifts. Stick with me, and I'll show you how we made them. To create the cubes for the calendar countdown, you just needed a consistent piece of wood that could be made into squares and then into cubes. I decided to go with MDF. I took 3 strips of MDF, so I made 3 MDF boards, and then I glued them up, putting good coverage of glue on 2, and then stacking them as so before putting clamps. I won't line it up. Not essential that this be completely lined up because we're going to knock the edges off afterward. But we want to get enough clamps on there for some equal pressure. And here I'm using some scrap wood to fit in there so I don't mar the surface of the MDF. If you put the clamps on too tight, could happen. I want to make sure there's enough glue run out here so that I know that I had good coverage of glue. And this should seal up rather nicely. I let that sit overnight. And, well, of course, I added more clamps. So I've got a lot more clamps to get off here. So I let that sit up overnight, and then I checked it out, made sure my board was straight. I was ready to go to the saw. So then I could take my glued up piece of 3 layers of MDF and take that to the table saw, set the width just to clean up one edge to get rid of that glue to give me a nice smooth surface. At that point, I could check the edge, make sure it was smooth and nice and straight. I could then use that edge up against my fence to clean up the other side. Again, getting rid of the glue up and providing me a nice square, clean edge to work with. I could take my calipers at this point, measure it. Now what I wanted to do was transfer that measurement but to my table saw, and then just ever so slightly less than that on the width between the table saw blade and the table saw fence. This would enable me to cut down my 2 clean surfaces, giving me an almost perfectly square surface. Then I could turn that one rotation to the right or left, run it through, and guarantee myself a completely square piece of material that I then could take sections of to make completely square blocks for this project. You see here the feed rate is very essential to feed it at a rate with this plywood blade so that it doesn't burn or scorch the sides, but gives you a nice, smooth, clean cut in this MDF. I'm using a 7 1/4 inch blade because that's the only one I had that was suitable for plywood. To make the base of our countdown calendar, I took my circular saw and cut off a section of MDF that was easier to work with over at the table saw. I could then take it to the table saw, set the table saw fence at a measurement that I wanted the depth of our base, and cut it smoothly using a 7 1/4 inch plywood blade. You saw that my riving knife was not quite aligned here, and I had to go back and align it so that it did cause problems with future cuts. Once I've finished with this cut and made all the strips that I needed, I was able to take my miter gauge, set up a stop block, and before using the stop block to measure, I had to square up one end. Then I could slide the piece over to my stop block, hold it, and be able to make repeatable cuts so that I could make our 10 calendar bases. Here I took a couple of the blocks and showing you that they fit nicely on the base. Now I need to make the sides of the base do the same process. Another strip cut to the same width. I'm going to square up one end, and I've reset my stop block to be able to slide my piece over to it and then make repeated cuts that way so that all my pieces were the same length. And then I'll be ready for assembly. When it came time to glue them up, I was gluing up 3 at a time and putting them side by side, put a clamp going sideways to hold them together. And I put clamps on the top, prevent them from buckling up because I wanted these joints to remain square. And then after I did 3 at a time, then I just had one left to do. I just took the base, put glue on each end, and set it up with the sides up against it. And I put a clamp side to side on it, and I put a clamp on the front to make sure that those stayed square. So I got the clamp side by side, and I put the clamp on the top just so it wouldn't buckle up or cause any gaps. And then I went back to the original clamp and gave it a little pinch for sure touch. To create the backs for our countdown calendars, I created a pattern with something I downloaded plus some freehand and copied it and sprayed it with some spray adhesive and stuck it to a piece of plywood. I'm going to use the pattern with the router table to create the backs in 1/4-inch plywood. But before we do that, I had to cut out the pattern itself. To do that, I used our inverted jigsaw jig, and I've created a separate video showing how I made that. And no, you cannot see the saw blade move up and down in real time like you can here. This actually took about 10 minutes as it was very detailed, and I tried to take my time to make this as close to desired as possible. Any errors here will be reproduced to the final product whenever we take this over to the router table. This produces a template that can be used not only for this project, but for future projects if we want to produce the same end result. At this point, I got my sander out and gave the template a good sanding to get rid of any rough edges. There was a part that I couldn't reach with the regular sander, so I used my Dremel tool and was able to get down in there and wanted to make it usable for as a template. I took a sheet of 1/4-inch plywood over and started cutting out the blanks. I first cut the length out and made a couple of those strips. Then I used the pattern to give myself a measurement with enough room on each side so I could fit the template to the blanks and be able to take those to the router. Here, I just carefully cut out those. I ended up cutting out my 10 blanks to take to the router table. Now that I have my template and my blanks ready, I can take some carpet 2-sided tape, put a few patches of that on my template, take the razor to peel back the paper from the back of the tape, and then I'll be ready to stick the template to the blank. At that point, I'll be ready to take it over to the router table with a flush trim bit. You want to align your bit so that the pilot bearing rolls along the template, and the blades will then automatically cut from your blank. Here you can see the template and the blank, how the bearing will follow the template and the blades can cut the blank. With the bit set at the right height, it makes pretty easy work on this 1/4-inch plywood to follow along the template. This is actually my first time using this type of bit, and it went pretty smoothly. Just follow as you go around, making sure to feed the product from right to left so that you're going against the cutting of the bit. This is pretty controlled to create a lot of dust, so I had my vacuum going at the same time. Shop vac made easy cleanup of the dust being created. You want to roll it along each side, and you'll find that the pattern, whenever you peel it off, is exactly the same shape as your template. The exception is right in the corner where at the top of the heart. There, I had to take it back to my jigsaw jig and cut just so that I could get to a sharp point. It's because the radius of the router bit is 3/8 of an inch. I then could take it over and give it all a quick sanding. All right, so it's the married man, and I've moved things inside from my garage, which is supposed to be a place for my wife's car, to taking over my wife's table. And got my daughter with me to help out. As you know, this project was inspired by the Christmas tree Christmas countdown calendar project we did together at Home Depot Kids Workshop. And we are working on a Valentine's Day countdown calendar so she can give it to her teachers. And we've already made the blocks, but they've got to be painted and get numbers on them. We've made the bases and glued those together. Now we have made the background, the hearts, and before we get to painting and so forth, we are going to glue this up. So the idea, Leia, is that this is the background. It needs to be glued to
like a stupid thing.
the base like this, and then we'll take clamps and just put a little bit of pressure on there while the glue sets up. And then this project is probably going to be totally with glue and no nails or screws, because there shouldn't be much weight or anything on these. They're just a gift, and they should hold together. The bases seem to be holding together quite nicely with glue, and they're MDF. And this is
and I also do Roblox on videos, so make sure to go check that out.
Go check out her Roblox videos. And we, what are you, the Robux queen?
The Robux, or maybe the Roblox. I think it's the Robux queen.
I think it's the Robux queen on YouTube. So this will be glued to this, and then we'll come back once we get all those started. And we'll be using Type Bond 2.
And whatever, goodbye. Just kidding.
Type Bond 2 glue from the Glue Bot. Thanks. After the glue up, my daughter and I stacked the hearts in a way that we could use less clamps. After they set for a while, we took them out of the clamps, laid them out, let them sit a while longer before taking them to the router table to use a flush trim bit to remove the excess. So at this point, I took each one over to my 20-year-old router table, and with a flush router bit, I flushed up the bottoms. The template had allowed for excess in these areas, so that we made sure that each one would stand up perfectly straight, and now that everything is perfectly flush. Hey everybody, so we finished our build. We've gone and my daughter helped me paint these, and then we've been giving them away as gifts. We've given away a few so far, and we still have these. I think they turned out really good. We hand painted the numbers because I couldn't get the stencils to work like I wanted to. And so these are countdown calendars, and we've done them in red and in pink. And they have the numbers. Right now it's 11 days to Valentine's Day. And then tomorrow we'll flip a block over and there'll be 10 days and so forth. These make great Valentine's gifts. People really seem to like them, and it's something that they can use not only this year but in years to come, and they'll remember you for. I really appreciate you watching the video, and I hope you would consider subscribing if you like this kind of content, and ring that bell so you can get more projects and tool builds in the future. We really enjoyed this. In my last video, there were over 1,000 views when I assembled the table saw. I appreciate everyone who watched those. And right now I have 20 subscribers. And I really appreciate each and every one of you who have subscribed. And I hope to see you in future videos. I hear my wife calling. I gotta go.